Hi, I'm Dan Richards from longlostparents.com, where we try to find your biological parent. Today's video is going to be about birth certificates. And what's so special about that? Well, did you know if you're adopted, you have two birth certificates? That's right. You have an original birth certificate that was given to you when you were born, and then you have an amended certificate. Let's find out what the difference is, and let's see how you may be able to obtain your original birth certificate. So let's talk about birth certificates. So everybody that was born in the United States gets what's called an original birth certificate. And on that, of course, it has your name, where you were born, your birth mother, your birth father, and some other pertinent information. However, if you were adopted, you receive what's called an amended birth certificate. And what they do in that case is, after you were actually adopted, they change your name on that birth certificate. They also change who the adopted mother is. And if you have an adopted father, they would list that also. And in some cases, they may actually even change where you were born. So there are some states, like Florida, that in years past, if you were born, let's say, in Georgia, but you were adopted in Florida, they could change that location as well. So you have to be very aware that everything on your amended birth certificate could potentially be incorrect. So how do you find the original birth certificate? Think about that. If you're adopted and you can get a hold of it, it actually has your birth mother on there for sure. And also potentially has where you were actually born. So it's very important, if you can get that information, to help identify who your biological parents were. And then if you can identify your mother, then you can look to see where she was living at the time, and you go through traditional genealogical record research to find out where she might be today. And it's a great start for some people. Unfortunately, as of this recording, only 10 states in the US have complete access to that information. And the other 40 states have some kind of restrictions. And I'm going to go through that. I'll show you a really neat website that has for each state what the current law is. Now the good news is a lot of states are trying to change those laws to make it more accessible for adoptees. And it'll have that information in this website. So let's get going, and I'll show you the website right now. We are at the American Adoption Congress website. And you can see the URL here at the top of the page. It is www.americanadoptioncongress.org/state.php. And this is the state that, this is the site that will allow you to see by state the type of access that they will grant you with regards to your original birth certificate. So let's go down here. So they've categorized each state by the type of restriction or non-restriction. So as you can see here, they have unrestricted access, access with restrictions, partial access with restrictions, and then finally sealed. And we'll go through an example of each state for each category. So why don't we start with unrestricted access. So let's go to a state that recently, within the last 3 years, have granted their residents the ability to gain access to their original birth certificate, and that is the state of New York. At the time of this video in 2022, there's only 10 states that provide unrestricted access to their records. New York was the last one to grant that. Unfortunately, the rules are changing, the laws are changing, so I expect this to be, there will be more states in this category as we move forward. So let's click on New York, and you can see here that this is the law, and you can see that unrestricted access to the long form original birth certificate for adult adopted persons. So essentially, you can get it if you're considered an adult in the state of New York. And I believe that's the age of 21. I'm not 100% sure. So you can get access to it. Here are some of the links if you wanted to apply for it. And each state does have information that if you want to apply, how you go about doing that. So this is an example of a state that has really unrestricted access to their records. So now let's go back to a different category. Let's go with access with restrictions. And so why don't we look at the state of Utah, because that's an example of a state that has that. So here you can see access with restrictions for the state of Utah. So in this particular state, you can have access to your original birth certificate if your birth parent had given prior consent for you to be able to acquire that. So your parent has to have signed a document and given it to the state of Utah in order for Utah to present you with your OBC. Or you can present documentation of your parent's death. Now that's really hard to do considering you don't know who they are, so that may be a challenge. So I'm not sure who wrote this I'm not sure who wrote this law, but it's a little interesting. So that's an example of access with restrictions. And we can go back and see the next example, which will be partial access. And we'll go to a state that I'm familiar with, which is the state of Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts, they allow people who are 18 years of age or older, or but you have to be born before 1974. So if you're older than that, if you're younger than that, you will not be able to receive your original birth certificate. I also know that this works because I had been doing some research for a close friend of mine who knew his dad was adopted, and he was able to acquire his father's original birth certificate with his birth mother's name on it. So that worked out quite well. Depends on your age, though. So now let's go to partial with restrictions. And in this case, let's look at the state of Illinois as an example. So you can see here, access with restrictions. And you can see it's a jumble of laws. It's quite confusing. And there's many different if, ands, or thus. So you really have to go through each individual state's law because they're all different. They were all created by the state's legislature, and they were put in place for a number of different reasons. But anyways, they're all different. You'll have to go through this if you were born in Illinois, see if you fit the criteria. And if you do, then you can request your birth certificate from the state of Illinois. You can see the link down here. So again, not the easiest thing to do when it gets to partial with restrictions. And so finally, let's look at sealed. It's very limited or no access without a court order, essentially. So let's look at a state that surprised me when I saw it, and that is the state of California. And unfortunately, it was because of money. So when they went before the legislature and they said, let's open this up, let's give adoptees access to their original birth certificates, and the Appropriations Committee did an estimate of how much it would take California to do that. And at the time, which was quite a long time ago, it was $16 million. And the legislature balked at that, and they would not pass the law. So that's still the case, even in 2022. Who knows when that'll change, if ever. So if you were born in California or one of the other states that are sealed, you have very little chance of finding your original birth certificate, unfortunately. And then you would have to proceed looking at your DNA, doing your genealogical research, working with somebody to help you out, maybe somebody like me. That's what I do. But if you have access to your original birth certificate, it saves a ton of time, gives you a real nice starting point. We can almost always find somebody if we have their name and where they were born. It's pretty easy. So Again, that's the situation on original birth certificates. I hope this helped you. If it did and you enjoyed the video, please click on like. It really does help me. And if you want to hear about my future videos that I'll be publishing, please click on the subscribe button and the bell, and you will see that when you go into YouTube that I've posted a new video. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you later.